Hi everyone, it's Desiree, and I am back with part 2 of the Card Makers Academy that I'm putting together for everyone. So, as always, just a little, it's going to be long, it's going to be gabby, and again, the statements that I'll make are things that I have found, researched, and so forth. So if I mistakenly state something incorrectly, I apologize now. But again, through the years of using these inks, these are things that I have found, and I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way. And I'm sure you guys have some tips and tricks along the way as well. So please make sure you leave those down in the comments so that everybody can see them. So this episode, or part, whatever we want to call it, we are going to focus on our inks and ink types, what we can do with them, how universal they can go, and maybe break down exactly, if you're just starting out, what you're looking for, or maybe you're looking to add to your stash with the inks that you currently already have. All right, so let's dig into the top range of inks. Let's call it that way. So we have our dye inks, and I have a few here. We have our pigment inks, and you can see I'm limited into those. And then we have hybrid inks. So let's break down the first set of inks. Let's talk about our dye inks. Okay, so dye inks, they are, the primary principles of a dye ink is they are fast drying, they are water-based, they're not great for embossing. You should not use them for embossing. However, if you are speedy with your stamping, you can use some clear ink, clear embossing powder on top of them, but you really got to be quick because these will go into the paper quickly. They absorb. They don't sit on the top of the paper. These are the most common that are purchased. We can use these for watercolors and other techniques such as ink smooshing. We can use these for ink blending as well. When we look at the ink blending though, as these, it absolutely, you can do that with your inks. You want to keep working at it because again, it goes into the paper quickly. These are not used for alcohol markers because they will bleed. They will smudge as you put your alcohol marker on top. Okay, so what do I mean by all of this? So when it comes to that, or when it comes to the concept of being used as watercolors. So if I take a piece, this is mixed media paper here that I'll be using. So if I take this, and I'm going to grab my water and a brush. All right, so if I take this ink here, and I probably should have just chosen something a little darker, and if I take my brush and add some water to it, I can move this color around if I move quickly enough. Now again, it goes into that paper. If I grab, so it's not reactive, so to speak, when it comes to paper. But if I grab a palette, okay, that's by Altenew, and if I take my brush with some water and I go in, I can react that, and now I can color with it. Now, again, you should use paper that is made for this, whether it's watercolor paper, Bristol paper, and we'll get into those papers in a little bit in another episode. All right, so that's how you can use these. You can actually create a palette to watercolor with. You can also put this down, and when we add some water to it, I'm just going to sprinkle some water on this because of course I don't have my sprayer near me. And if I just put some water down onto that, take my piece of paper, I can then ink smoosh down and get that effect as well. All right, so that's how you can work with dye inks. Now, one of the things that I do love about Stampin' Up! Is, now this is the old style of their cases, but if I take this and press down on it, I'm pushing down onto the pad and push that up, I now have ink into that well. I can go right into it and I can start my watercolor. So you can line these up right in front of it, and you don't really need your palette to sit in front of you. Now again, they've changed the design of their cases recently. I just didn't pull one of the new ones out. These are more difficult to do because you're really pressing down. Now, when we look at the difference in the pads, there can be some differences. So here's a Concord in 9th, and here is the Gina K. So you can see the pads. I'm going to tilt to the side. This is a little bit higher. This is still raised as well, but this is like a foam pad. So there's a learning curve when it comes to the foam pads. And I'm going to put the Altenew over here as well. And your Concord in 9th is similar to your Stampin' Up! Again, it's got that foam element to it. It's very spongy. So if you are like me, and I do a very hard, I sit there and I bang it down onto the stamp, you're going to fill that stamp with ink. So a light touch is perfect when it comes to stamping with that. With these, you can be a little bit more violent, if you've got a heavy hand like I do, because these have a foam type, a thicker pad to it. All right, it's tough to describe. At least I'm forgetting the words. So again, same thing with the Altenew. These are a little bit more firmer, not sponge, not foam-like. These are, let's say, sponge when it comes to that. So when we go into, I'm going to put my caps back on and hopefully I do it the right way here. I do like these types of pads though. Now you also want to look at, when it comes to your inks, some come with reinkers and some don't. Now, even though some products do not come with a reinker, they last for an extremely long time. The ones that I'm showing here, the Concord or the Stampin' Up, the Altenew, and the Gina K, there are reinkers. I apologize. I am not sure if the Concord in 9th has reinkers. I apologize for not having that information. So as your pad dries out, and you'd be able to tell because you'll see this white, it'll get white along the edges a little bit. You can just get that reinker, put a little bit of ink back into that, let it set, and then you're good to go for more stamping. Or with the number of times and how long these pads last, you could just buy another pad. These are available individually as well. Okay, so that is your dye ink principle. It's got a level of versatility to it. Again, you always want to put it on a palette to work with it, or a mat to work with it with your watercolor techniques. You can see when you go directly onto a piece of paper, it's going to just absorb right in there. So you're not going to be able to blend that out. The next ones that we'll talk about are pigment inks. Now, these are direct pigment inks. These are not the Oxides. And this one is a little different. So we're going to talk about this one a little bit later. So I don't have, these are the only two. There's one more that I have when it comes to a pigment ink, and that's the Gina K Ivory. But these pigment inks, They are slow drying when it comes to a pigment ink. They are very much used for embossing. So if you stamp a sentiment or an image, if you have multiple colors, like I believe the Avery L has pigment inks, you can stamp your image and then use a clear embossing powder on top of that, which is an economical way to get more colors for your sentiments when you heat emboss by using your clear embossing powder over it. These will take longer to dry, so you may have to heat set them. Well, you will have to heat set them if you're stamping an image or a sentiment, because it's no sooner you stamp it, and if you wipe across it, yes, you will smudge that ink. Absolutely. It'll, ask me how I know. Yes. It's just going to happen because it sits on top of your paper when it comes to the pigment inks. Now, they come in beautiful colors, just wonderful shades. Now, when it comes to these pigments, yes, you can add water to them. As you can see, it's very reactive to it. And I can go right on top of that dye ink. And again, I only have white, so I apologize for that. Now, if I grab, and what I should have grabbed is some dark shades of cardstock, which I have right here. So if I grab some black, I'm going to add some water to this. It's going to absorb in because I'm putting that water in there. However, I can pick this up and I can do very light splatters with it. So again, you're really watering that down and it's going to be very light to see. All right, so the main thing that I use my pigments with, okay, is accenting. I like to ink blend around cards, especially around the holidays, to make it look like a snowy window effect going around it. These are great with stencils. We've seen many other creators on YouTube use, especially Jennifer McGuire. She uses white a lot to create a variegated look when it comes to her inks or even on her cardstock. Again, these two colors do a great job just stretching your supplies, whether it's your cardstock or lightening what you've already stamped on top of. Okay, but just know, while you can mix water with it, it's not something that you may necessarily see unless you get into those other colors. All right, you can definitely do that. I just never got into the pigment inks except for the white or the ivory. Okay, so the next one are hybrid inks. Now, scrapbook.com, their inks are hybrids, and these are easy to blend. It does, after you stamp, it kind of levels out onto the paper, so in case if it looks splotchy, some of that splotchiness does go away. However, the hybrids, while there is a mixture of the pigment and dye here, it does dry quicker than your pigment inks. It is not water soluble, so you won't see me doing that here, okay? And this is also good with alcohol markers, okay? This can be used. Now, if you have the scrapbook.com and even the Altenew dyes, they have layers, okay? Layers of 4 because of layering stamps, or even the layering dyes or stencils that have come out now. My suggestion is that even though these dry quickly, I would heat set in between before you put your next layer. When you stamp your image, it's still going to be a little bit damp. When you put another dye ink on top of that, or just another ink on top of that, it's going to bleed through those fibers just a little bit. So you won't have as crisp of an image. So I have found when I do layering stamping to just real quick come in with my heat tool, dry it for like 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds, and boom, I'm ready to go with my next layer. And I have much crisper images. Okay. Now, again, I mainly have dye inks. And then there's other inks that I get into in a second. And then these are the only hybrids that I have, so to speak. Okay, so those are the differences between your hybrids, your dyes, and your pigments. Now, I'm sure there's more, but they're the high levels. And these are the three main ones that we go for as paper crafters. But there's so many other inks that are out there that are available to us with special techniques, with special ways that we can use them. I don't know how, here I got water all over the place, hold on. That we can use them. So when I was talking about the pigment inks, one of the ones that I pulled in was the Versafine Black. Now, this is a very, this is my go-to for sentiments. It is a quick drying pigment ink. This is great if you want a dark, crisp line for an image that you want to watercolor, because this is good for your watercolor images if you're going to do that, or if you're going to do ink smooshing. This is not something that you will use for alcohol markers. Okay, it will bleed, it will run. All right. Now, I have had this pad from the very beginning since I started, which is close to 5-6 years ago, paper crafting, and I have yet to have to add any ink to this. There are Reinkers available for it, and I have yet to ever have to do that, and I still get beautiful, beautiful images. It's still juicy. It still stamps phenomenal. Know that some of these inks that we're showing, these ink pads, they will stain your stamps, especially the photopolymer ones, and that is okay. I got over it. I was one of those people that it would drive me crazy. This is definitely one of them. It's okay. Your stamps will still stamp. You'll still get those great impressions. So again, different pigment ink dries quickly, and what's great is even though it dries quickly, you can still add a clear embossing powder on top of this to do heat embossing with it. Okay, so this here, this is definitely my go-to for sentiments when I'm stamping them with a black, when I want it to be in a black ink. Now, items that, ink pads that are similar to that are the obsidians. Okay, Altenew came out with an obsidian black. Desiree K came out with an amalgam, which is also an obsidian. So here, these are similar to this. They will give you that beautiful, crisp, deep black image that you're looking for, or for your sentiments. Now, the Altenew, okay, is waterproof. Okay, so that means it'll work. I'm reading this as I go here just to make sure I'm stating this correctly. So this will work great with watercolor techniques if you want to watercolor after you've stamped your image, and ink smooshing and so forth. Well, Desiree K's, just to confirm, it is waterproof, and this can also work with alcohol markers. So this has a little bit more universal. You can actually stretch this out a little bit to use both for alcohol and watercolors. Always let it dry. Again, these, I am never one to say, okay, as soon as I stamp, boom, I can go on to my next technique. I always give it a little bit to settle itself. You know, settle itself into those fibers, let it go, and then I know I can go back into it. Even though these are obsidians, they do provide crisp images. I still go to my Versafine for my sentiments. So really, my Versafine is one definitely for sentiments, and I will pull these in when it comes to images. So those are the differences when it comes to the obsidian. Now this obsidian from Altenew, it does not say that it will work with alcohol markers. Okay, I always read the back, and that's what I always go by. Where the Desiree K does, and I have used it for both. I've used it for colored pencils, watercolors, and alcohol, and have not had an issue with it. Okay, so our other specialty types of ink pads. Now, this one here, this is a true and tried favorite of mine, my Mementos. I have the Memento Dewdrops, and then I also have the Tuxedo Black. Memento is the ink that I use, this one, for my alcohol coloring. When I do alcohol coloring, I will pull this one in. It's a habit, and I still like it. I am not one, and again, my personal preference, when I stamp an image, and if I'm going to color it and I want to use black, I don't want that deep solid black line. I don't want the line to overpower all of the coloring that I'm doing. So I want that to be soft. And this is why I go with this. All right, so whenever and if I'm ever doing alcohol marker coloring, I will pull out my Mementos. Now, you guys have seen, if you've seen my videos before, I pull out my Mementos because I love to use these with my peg stamps. But if I should travel, if I'm teaching a class somewhere, not now, but hopefully sometime soon, these are the ones that I bring because they're compact, they're portable, and I have all the colors that are available. All right, so that's the concept of the Memento and how I use it. The next one that I will pull in are Archival Inks. Ranger has a great line of Archival Inks. So they have it in colors. The main ones that I use, as you can see, the larger ones is Potting Soil and Jet Black. I also like to use this when I watercolor as well because this is waterproof. These are not good for alcohol markers. Okay, they will smudge. But I like the Archivals, and then what's great is they started coming out with the distress colors in the Archival Inks. I love to use the colors when I'm doing my art journals because, again, they won't bleed, they won't move, they are permanent. These will definitely stain your stamps, whether rubber, photopolymer, or any other type, silicone / acrylic, whatever we want to call those. But these are great. Once they are dry, they are permanent. All right, there is no moving of it. So it does make it great for watercoloring techniques. All of these inks are acid free, and they are permanent. At least these are. Okay, so I use this in my journals. I use the colors in my art journals, like I said, and then I use this for watercolor because, again, while it's black and it gives a nice black stamp, it's not that tight black, that really dark black that you want for your sentiments. Another type of ink that I will use, especially when I'm, or 9 out of 10, when I'm doing a colored pencil, or a watercolor, mainly for my colored pencils, is a no-line coloring effect. Now, there are 3 that I use. Ink on 3 came out with something that's called Fade Out. It is an ink that when you stamp it, you can see it, but over time, it's going to go away. It actually, when it's completely dry, you won't see it. You will only see your coloring that you have put onto the paper. What I like about this one is it takes a little bit longer to dry, so you can see it. There's times where I'm working on a piece and I just can't do it in one sitting. That piece could take me 2.5, 3 hours. and there's a break that I've got to take in between. When I come back, I can still see my lines. They're definitely lighter, but I can still see them. I'll also use the Simon Says Fog or Barely Beige. It's a very, very pale ink when it's stamped. Now, it is a dye ink, but you can use it for your watercolor because it'll just blend in. But it does, I have found when I stamp with the Simon Says and even sometimes the Gina K, but especially with the Simon Says, you can still see the imprint of that ink, which is an awesomely cool effect. Okay, so you can still see that outline. It just goes to that color that you're using around it when you're trying to create a background. But I like to use this. It's a very pale gray. I'll use this sometimes if I'm working on my toned gray or toned blue cardstock, mixed media cardstock that I use for my colored pencils, or especially if I can't find that, because that's usually why. Gina K also came out with the Amalgam series, and she added Warm Glow, Skeleton Leaves, Whisper, and Barely There. So 4 different colors. Again, depending upon the piece that you're using, what the color tone is, you can use a specific very pale beige of dye ink so that it'll just sit in the background. So again, this is definitely a fade out ink, where it goes away, where these are just inks that will stay there. They won't fade, but you can hide them within your coloring to give you that no line coloring effect. Let's talk about embossing. Now, there's many different versions of clear inks. These are also known as watermarks, embossing inks, clear inks, and many different types are available. They all work the same. These inks are sticky. Okay, that's the main concept. Now, that's different than a sticky embossing powder. Okay, these are just sticky. It's a wet ink. It's clear. Now, these are interchangeable between a watermark and embossing. So when we say watermark, if we stamp an image onto a piece of cardstock. So let's do that. If I take an image, yes, I'm trying to find an image because you all know me. I'm silly that way. So I'm just going to grab a small heart as I'm making all kinds of noise. So if I just choose my Simon Says, and you can tell that this pad is awesomely loved. This is what happens when we don't clean our stamps first. But it still works. I actually, to be very honest with you on a side note, I do kind of like that ink is there. Sometimes, you know, we don't know if we stamped our image, and sometimes if we walk away, you know, did I already stamp that? Or if we did stamp it, I don't see it. This gives me a faint line and it goes away. I don't see it. I don't recommend that though. Just saying. So if I take this and stamp this down, you can see the image, not because of the black. Okay, so let's... All right. So let's go into this one. You can see it's nice and clean. So I'm going to go in, make sure my stamp is nice coated. I'm going to stamp it down. See, and there you go. So yeah, this had a little bit of the black going on there, but you can see this one from a clean pad, I can see that image. So you can create these watermarks and create a tone on your cardstock. So in a way, you can create your own pattern paper by stamping your image in the background. You don't have to add any embossing powder on top of that. You can just have fun with it. Now, when it comes to this, you would just apply your embossing powder and then you would heat set it, and then it will be shiny or gold or clear or black, whatever color embossing powder you use. Now remember, there's going to be many more videos in this series where I will actually show you how to emboss, what that's going to look like, and how all of this comes together, because after we go through each of the parts, at the end, there's going to be many videos coming in showing specific techniques using the items that I'm describing. So please, nobody come back and say, Blanky, you should have shown us that. It's going to be shown. Here, we're just talking about it. Okay? So that's what's great when it comes to your clear inks. It can help stretch your supplies. Maybe you don't have pattern paper. Maybe you want to create a very faint design in the back. You can do that using your clear ink. Remember though, the clear ink, it's in the world. It's not a pigment. It's a sticky ink, but it does take time to dry. So you do need to heat set it if you're using this technique and not embossing with it. And again, there's many brands out there. Versamark is the big one, the main one that everyone does go to. I really do like the Simon Says. I think it's juicy, as the same thing with the Altenew. And that's what I look for in my embossing pad. I really want it to be wet. And I don't like to re-ink these. I will just buy a new pad once it's done. But again, I've had these forever, still have yet. That's what that one looks like. So yeah, that's like the mid-range. This one's okay. This one's nice and clean. So we keep this one nice and clean. When it comes to the different techniques that we can do. All right, so those are our clear inks. Now there's another clear ink, and that is the Alcohol Lift ink. This is used, you can see, yep, forgot to clean the pads again. So this is a special solution here, and it's used with alcohol inks. So after you do a background in alcohol inks on UPO or special alcohol ink paper, you can then take a stamp, put this on it, press down on it, and then from that panel, take a dry cloth, wipe it away, and that image is going to come out of that alcohol. It actually eats through the alcohol just where you stamped so that you can wipe it away. It doesn't affect any of the other part of the background unless you stamp there. So again, very specialized. This, I mean, it's the only thing that you use it for. I'm sure we'll come up with other ways at some point, but this is the only thing that you use this for. This is not a technique, for those of you that have been here for a while, that you know, have not seen in a while. I struggle with this, and it's operator error, but it's something that I continue to try to see what type of results we can get. The other types of inks. So let's talk about the Distress line. So, and y'all knew I was going to pull in my vintage photo, right? I'm just saying. So the Distress line is widely popular, and it is my favorite line. So you have the original Distress inks, and you have the Distress Oxides. Now they came out a few years ago, and these are extremely unique. So let's talk first about the Distress inks. These are dye inks. These are translucent inks. Okay, so these I do not recommend for stamping because you will not get a solid line. Now, if you're looking for a distressed line, let's go for it. That's exactly what you're going to get. It's awesome looking, and it does beautiful things. Absolutely beautiful things. Now I'm just going to pull out some Bristol paper here. That's what I like to work with a lot. The beauty of these, while they're not recommended for stamping. Now some say, and I've seen some people use their clear ink to stamp on their image first, so that helps to condition it. So this is also great to condition your stamps too, especially if they're big and solid. I usually just use a dry cloth for that. But you can use this to condition your stamps, and then I've seen people use the inks to go on top, and you can get a better solid image. I have not tried that, only because I don't want the clear ink in these ink pads. I mean, I'm good if the colors mix. I mean, I can work with that, but it's just not something that I have tried, so I don't have an experience with it. If one of you guys do, let me know down there. Okay. So now we all know what I use this for. If you don't, I use it for my journals. I also use it for my cards. I love using this one ink pad, my vintage photo, to go around the edge of images, especially when I collage. And it doesn't matter if it's pink, light blue, purple, green, brown, or anything. I will use this to help that image stand out. And I use it very heavily. Very, very heavily in my journal designs. Yes, I use the Reinkers for these. This is a type of heavy pad that is created in there, and I do not have an issue with the Reinkers, and I'm re-inking this one often. Yes, okay. The beauty of these is, for me, if you get these are very versatile. We can ink smush. Now I have the cubes. Of course, I got the big one, and I have some big ones. Now for all of my cubes, I put a little tiny piece of painter's tape so that when I pull this off, I don't lose the cap. I can't tell you how many caps I have lost. And then when I hold it, I just hold it with these two fingers, and I'm able to take that down to put my color down. It just works for me. And then we'll put some pink there. Okay. So, as I said, very, very versatile when it comes to these inks. Now, what we can do is I can add some water, take a piece of watercolor or Bristol cardstock, push down, and now I'm getting my ink smushing technique there. Now, here's what I really love about these inks is the water puddles that I get when you just let this dry. It doesn't dry like watercolor, where it's smooth and, sometimes watercolor blooms and spreads. This actually gives you dimension. It's very difficult to describe, and I apologize, but I just love the effect that this will give when you do this. All right, so I'm going to let that dry, and then maybe I'll remember, hopefully, to show you that. Now, what I can also do is I can watercolor with these. So if I put some, what is this? Kitsch Flamingo. And I'm going to put down crushed olive. And this is peeled paint. So they're the colors that I grabbed. Let me put down a little bit more of crushed olive. So what I can do is I can watercolor with these. So if you wanted to try watercolor and at the same time you really wanted to look at these, here you go. Now again, these are not going to act like your watercolor pan sets, whether it's Winsor & Newton, QORs, or the Koi's, whatever it is, the Tombies, they're not going to act like that, but they do give beautiful results. I'm going to use my brush, and I can come in, and I'm just going to add some petals for some flowers. And then I'm going to come in here to make this to make it a side. And then I'm going to come in, and with my tip, that's my center. So then I'm going to come down and just with a thin stroke, add a line. We're going to add some leaves. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick up some of this darker color, and I'm just going to drop it in to add those different shades. Since this olive green is closer to yellow, I can add it to the base here. Again, just adding some small lines to give it a little bit difference. And then add some dots in there. So this, I can force this to move through, again with my brush. And that is what we can do with Distress Inks. Okay, so we can watercolor. They are going to give you hard lines though, okay? So you can see that, but you see, I like the hard lines, especially when I watercolor. I love those hard lines. I love the blooms when it comes to the florals. All right, so I'm going to set this to dry too, so that you side to dry, so that you can see what this does. Here's our panel, and you can see it looks like blooms, but it just gives, and this is still a little bit wet, but it just gives these light and darks in there, like somebody put droplets. And that's the other thing that you can do with these. You can add droplets to this. You can spray it, because this is water reactive. Even though it's drying, it will react with that water. And now I've just added water droplets. I know they're difficult to see because I choose such wrong colors here. But again, you can see I was able to lift that up. So very water reactive. So I will show you those once they're dry. We'll come back to those. Okay? All right. Not good for stamping, but you can. Absolutely. I mean, I've stamped with these with a sentiment, and I actually mix these when I stamp a sentiment with these with the embossing glazes through the Distress line. And it's a great combination. And again, we'll get into those. These are great to create a watercolor palette. Absolutely phenomenal. You can ink blend your backgrounds with these using an ink blending tool. You can do your ink smooshing. You can do your watercoloring. You can watercolor a background by laying these down and spreading them out on that page. So very, very universal. It's not just one application that you could create with those. Then the next ones we have here are Distress Oxides. For those of you that see my videos before, you know these are my favorite. I love my Distress Oxides. I just love the look of it, okay? So here's the difference. The Distress Oxides are a dye and pigment combination. There's a dye component and a pigment component, a pigment ink. So these two inks have come together and have been created in one pad. These will be different colors than your Distress inks. So don't think that they're the same color. They have the same name, but there's a chalkiness that comes into these. These are translucent as I'm bouncing my camera, so I apologize for that. Here's what I mean by that. If we look, and I only swatch a few of the things. So here, when you look at these are the Oxides. So let's look at Barn Door. So this is the Oxide Barn Door. That's what it looks like when it's dry. It's got this chalky haze to it. That's the oxidation. I love the oxidation. Now, you can see it. I see it a lot on homes in my area. So a lot of people like to put those copper awnings on their windows, which is great. But at the same time, they complain after a few years because that copper is going to oxidize. Mean it's going to get this brown green component. It looks like it's rusting. It's doing all that. But it's it's actually oxidizing. And I think it's beautiful. I love it when people complain about it because it's like, you should know this by now. Just saying. Okay, went off on the tangent there. But that's what it's doing. It's oxidizing there, and it gives this chalky look. It's beautiful. Now, on the other side, so again, the oxides are here, and then on the other opposite side of each of these tiles, I have the Distress Ink color, if it has it. That's the Barn Door Distress Ink. See the difference in the colors? This is chalkier. This is solid. It's going to be darker. So you're not going to have the same results. You have very different results through these two inks. Now, if anyone wants to know, these are coin protectors, page protectors that I got from Amazon. And then I just cut little tiny pieces of cardstock and just put them in there. So again, different results. Translucent, solid. The beauty of your oxides also is you can stamp it. These are good for stamping. And then once you stamp it, add your clear embossing powder. Because again, these are going to sit on top of the paper. They take a while to dry. So you can do that. The beauty of them also is you can stamp them on a dark cardstock. Doesn't matter what color it is. So you can barely see that. But what's awesome is they turn on when you add water to them. See how it lightens up? You can see it now just a little bit more. It's like a light bulb that just happens with this, okay? But again, these do take longer to dry, but you can stamp them on dark cardstock, which is awesome. Very, very awesome. All right. These are creamy. My description. To me, these are very creamy. You can blend these very well. So if I take this piece of mixed media, and if I lay this color down, you can see I get solid coverage right there. And if I come in with my pine needles and put that there, since it sits, oh, this one broke, hold on here. There we go. Since it sits on top of the paper, just with my finger, I've now blended that together. And that's all you have to do. Just take your finger and rub it back and forth, and you've now created that blend. These blend beautifully. You can also do other techniques with these. We can do our ink smooshing. Now again, you're going to have a difference when it comes to the ink smooshing. Remember, you can see how that came to life. It got lighter. And if you look at that, you can see, I don't know if you can see how they separate. See that one right there? It's separating from the pigment and the dye, which is awesome. So here again, piece of Bristol paper. Go down, come up, go down, come up. And when this dries, you can layer them. The key to ink smooshing and adding your layers is let it dry in between. So you can get the same results with these. You can get spots, and that's how you get your spots. And that's what it's going to do when it dries. Okay, so you can do that. You can also, just as we did before, if I put some more color down, and again, I just chose 3 greens because that's what I grabbed. going to grab a piece of Bristol again. I'm going to grab my watercolor, my brush. I'm going to add water to it. You can see how it changes, and you can do the same thing. You can watercolor with these. And just add your petals or whatever it is you want to watercolor. You can come in, and if I add this one, I can add those touches there. When I touch water, it will blend, but it's going to give these awesome hard lines when it comes to what you're doing with it. You can mix your colors and get all of these beautiful differences when it comes to that. So again, you can use these as a palette. But just know that they dry. They are not your typical watercolor. They're not your typical pan sets. And they're even different than your regular distress inks. So again, you've got all of these differences that you can do with them. These have one more element that your distress inks do not. You can stamp with these and heat emboss with these. These you cannot. I don't recommend it. Let me put it to you that way. I do not recommend it, all right, because they are translucent. Now again, you can give the clear embossing ink a try. I've just never tried that, so I can't speak upon that and what that does. So again, now this is still drying, but you can see you're getting that chalky haze coming over it. This here is almost dry, but I've got these layers that are going on. It holds on to those specks. I loved that area, how it dried. And you can see those fine speckles when I added my water. This is what the image looks like as it dried. Should have put the petals closer together. So you can do those techniques with it. So there is one more ink that we can talk about, and I'm going to be very honest. I have yet to use it. StazOn. StazOn is a highly different ink. It is a solvent. It is an ink that you would use, or that you can use on glass, fabric, wood. You can use it on paper. You do need a special cleaner to clean your stamps with this. It's just very different. It is alcohol based. All right. So this is extremely permanent. Absolutely extremely permanent. I have to be honest with you. I have never used this. Look, it's still, and when you get these, there is a protective inner cover that you need to keep on top of this, because that helps, because since it's alcohol based, it's going to dry out quickly. So if you leave the top off of this and that other plastic thing, it'll be done in 24 hours, because it'll actually dry out. There is a smell to this because of it being alcohol. Oh, wow. Yes, that was the first time I did that. Okay, so if you're going to use this, please be in a well-ventilated room. Whoa. Okay, don't do that. Some people may like that. It's almost like, do you remember the markers? Oh my God, I'm probably aging myself here. Do you remember the markers? I used to love those markers. Maybe that's what's wrong with me today. The ones that smelled like fruit. I forget who made them. You know, they smelled like, you know, the red was cherry and the yellow was banana and the purple was grape and blueberry. I used to love those things. that's similar, but it has that alcohol base to it. So yeah, don't, we digress. So that's the last one. Again, I have yet to ever use this. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so those are the inks. Okay, again, not showing what these inks can do in this video. Just very little bit of what you can do, how they will react. As I said, as we continue through the different parts of this series, at the end, there's going to be close to 10 videos at the end of this that's going to show just how all of this works, you know, making specific cards, whether it's a shaker, an interactive, going into, you know, using die cuts. I have it written down, but it's not at that page right now. So just, so far there's 10 techniques that I've come up with, when it comes to that. Oh, that's how that dried. See how, look how gorgeous that would be, the petals. So that's what these do. They do not act like normal watercolors. There will be a difference, and you get that beautiful chalkiness. What I love using them with as watercolors, and yes, that's one of the technique videos, is look at that blend that you get. It's automatic. You don't have to, not that you have to work on it as with watercolors, okay? You don't have to do that, but you just get these beautiful differences when it comes to each of the strokes that is already there. So it's absolutely gorgeous. So that will be definitely one of the videos. That's what our blend looks like. And this is still wet. I mean, here's a new clean finger. See, it's still wet. Now remember, and again, when I do a background and if I die cut it, I put a piece of paper on top of it before I put my last sheet down so that it doesn't get all over my cutting plate. Little side note there. All right, so that is ink pads. All the different types of ink pads. All right, those that we love, those that we use the most, different ways on how I use them, why I use them that way, and all of those fun things. I mean, it's awesome that we have choices. I think that's great. You know, there's all kinds of different things that, you know, we can do. A lot of people ask me, well, what would you get? What would, you know, what are you looking for when it comes to that? And, you know, the thing that I say the most is, what are you looking primarily to do? Are you someone that's going to use alcohol markers? If that's your because we all have that one niche, that one technique that just draws us in, and that's our comfort zone. That's what we really want to focus on, and that's what we do with our cards. If you are a alcohol marker, then you want to make sure that you have an ink that you can use with alcohols. So if you're looking for colors at the same time, I would suggest the Mementos. If you're just looking for the outline for your alcohol, then I would suggest the Gina K. Gina K is one that will work. The Simon Says stamp will work. There's so many. You can just choose which one that you would want to use the most. If you like layering stamps, you know, the Altenew layering stamps, Pink Fresh Studio is coming out with the stencils as well. Hero Arts has layering stamps. Then I would suggest you look at either scrapbook.com or Altenew, because they take the thinking out of it. And that is me. I don't want to think. I want to be able, yep, here's the 4 blues that I need for my layering stamp. I don't want to say, okay, well, now does this one work well? Does this one go well? It would just drive me crazy. So go with those. Now, you'll get more versatility out of the Altenew because you can use it with water techniques. You can use it with ink smooshing. You can watercolor with them, putting it down on a palette, picking it up with your brush. You can do that with the Altenew. So you get that one more step of how to stretch out those supplies. So that's the same thing with Stampin' Up. You can do the same thing with them. So it's just something to look at when you choose what inks you want to use. Again, you can do the same thing with the distress ink. So if you already have a dye ink pad, then maybe you want to accent it with distress inks or the oxides. Or maybe you just want to buy the one pad so that you can try out and keep working with no line coloring. Again, our options and our choices are endless. And sometimes that is confusing. Sometimes that is stressful. Do your research. Look at all of these videos that are out there. Look at how they're using them. Look at how they break it down. And what the outcome is, what the properties are. How versatile are these inks? A lot of the ink pads now that are coming out are now being able to be used for watercoloring and or alcohol, which is great. We can combine those two aspects. So make sure you do your research. I can try to answer any questions that you have. By all means, I'm always available for questions. Please don't ever not reach out if you have a question. I know it takes me a little bit to get back to you, but I promise I will get back to you when it comes to that. All right. So as always, I hope you enjoyed. Again, this was part 2 in our Card Makers Academy. It's a very laid back process. It's based off of how I've used things, what I have seen, what I've learned, and so forth. So this is what we've got going on here. Now, part 3, so now I'll be able to start giving you updates on what part's coming up because I actually broke this whole thing out. I'm up to like many pages written here, so that's good. So part 3 is going to be tools and adhesives. Oh yes. So we are going to break down all of the many tools that are out there for us to use, whether they're from the craft mats that we can work on all the way up to erasers, gem and sequin pickers and scissors and stamp positioning tools and acrylic blocks, pokey tools, all of that fun stuff. We're also going to talk about glues in that because that's a tool as well. And we will go through the dry, liquid, dimensional, tapes, sheets, all different types of forms, dots, and the different glues that are out there and how I use each of these glues. So I've got a lot of glues, and I use them for specific things. And I will be able to go over that. So I hope you stay tuned for next one, or for part 3. And we will take it from there. So guys, thank you so much for your very kind comments, which is wonderful to see when it came to part 1. I'm glad you found it helpful. I know I didn't hit all of the papers. I didn't hit those coloring technique papers, let's say. But I'm going to hit that in another video. Again, there is just so much, and I know I'm giving you so much information. But at least there's a way where, you know, you could speed up, and as I pick up something, you'll see, hey, I wanted to know about that. What did she say? And you'll be able to reverse back onto it. Okay? So again, thank you so much. I'm glad you're finding this helpful. But again, if you've got any tips, please make sure you leave those down below. I'd love to read them. I learn things from you guys as well, which I think is great and I think is wonderful. And that's how it should be. I will just link to maybe groups of, you know, if you want to check out, you know, the Simon Says Stamp Inks, then by all means, I'll just have that link there and so forth. But again, I'm looking for this to be informative. and to make sure you get that information. If you have a question, please make sure you leave that down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can, and hopefully with an answer that you're looking for. Continue to enjoy your day. Enjoy your time, whether it's with family and friends or whether you're in your crafty space, just having fun and trying new things and listening to my gabbiness in the background. But remember, no matter what it is, smile. Make sure you enjoy this process, and always, always be creative. Till part 3, guys. Take care.